Please note, this following podcast features bad language, right from the fucking start. And now, dissecting the week's most shared news stories and separating the truth from the nonsense. It's the Ministry of Swooping.
So hello and welcome to the Ministry of Swooping, the podcast that does what you can't be bothered to do, look into the memes and stories, doing the rounds on social media and working out if there's any truth to them. And yes, I know it is an unusual name, but then so is Truth or Consequences New Mexico. We do this because online is getting increasingly harder to tell the truth from the fiction. Like Adolf Hitler once said, the problem with things quoted on the internet is they're often not true. So we have a little fun whilst we do a bit of fact-checking. So settle in for some bad/lazy investigative journalism and a whole heap of bullshit. I'm your host for today, the Secretary of State for Nonsense, Al Galpin. And joining me is my Parliamentary Undersecretary for this week's show. She's the host of Primarily 2020 and once hitchhiked all the way from Delaware to New Delhi. It's Karen Robinson. Hi, Karen.
Hello.
How are you? You okay?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. It's been a funny old week in Parliament, hasn't it? Like it's a truth and fiction. It's all just merging together into nonsense in the world.
It is indeed. That's what I seem to have started this podcast at, well, either the right or the wrong time, depending on how you look at it. There's just so much choice for stories, really, lately.
Well, exactly. I mean, in the US, you've got the US president drawing, President Trump, of whom I speak often on my podcast because it's all about US politics. He's drawing with Sharpies on maps to convince people that his false statement that Alabama is about to be hit with a hurricane is true. Yeah. You couldn't make it up. It's really, it's beyond parody.
It really is. It's helping all of us who do these types of podcasts, that's for sure.
Yeah. It's a funny old thing, though, because I'm just not sure it's helping, obviously it's not helping humanity.
No.
But it's kind of breaking our brains, isn't it? Because we're so used to seeing so much nonsense come so quickly at us, and there's social media. And I just feel like there are real basic skills in understanding the world that we're all slowly going insane and losing the grip on reality. So Thank you for doing this. Hopefully it helps.
Yeah, well, I hope so. Part of my concern is maybe the people listening to this are the people who don't necessarily need this. But there we go. If we get one or two along the way who are converted,
they can spread the word.
Yeah, exactly. So there we go. So Karen, if you want to, before we start as well, just tell us a little bit about what you do on your podcast.
Yeah, so Primarily 2020 is the outgrowth of my many, many years as a political activist and US Democrat, and also in my paid-for profession, in my day job, so to speak, I'm a strategist for a PR agency. So I'm just really interested in kind of persuasion strategies and campaigns. But I'm also kind of somebody who doesn't want to spend too much time dwelling in horror. So I didn't want to do a podcast about Republicans and Donald Trump. And I thought it would be more positive to do something about what a better future could look like. So we're focusing on the Democratic primary. And we're really just I'm trying to unpack we've got a lot of real controversies and issues and kind of deep philosophical conversations we need to have as a party. And so I think it's useful in the primary to make sure we have those conversations about what immigration in America should look like and, what is the kind of economic system that promotes most justice and fairness and equality as a society, and, how we should deal with the rise of the far right and kind of support people with minority backgrounds, and just trying to kind of I say it's about looking at the politics, policies, and personalities of the 2020 primary. But for me, it's about kind of looking forward rather than just dwelling in the horrors we see every day, about imagining a future that could be different than this.
Yeah. No, that sounds good. Doing good work.
I try.
With some introductions out of the way, should we get onto some good stuff, get onto some news stories? Now, I've scoured some social media for news stories and memes that have been shared and taken at face value, dug a little deeper to try and find the truth behind the headlines and any maths behind stats. So without further ado, we're going to our first news story, and I will take a look at this one. The headline or the caption on this one was "The True Face of Remainers." Now, it's a photo that has been shared on Facebook and Twitter. It's been shared by pages such as the Westminster Bubble. It's not been really seen in any news articles or anything like that. It's just been shared by a lot of people on Facebook and Twitter. And it's basically a photo that shows pro-EU protesters burning the Union flag, accompanied by the caption, "The true face of Remainers." And it's been suggested that this took place at the recent protests over the last week or so in London. And when you look at that, what's your first instinct?
Well, the first thing I thought, honestly, when I saw it was it looked a lot like old school American misinformation, because there has been, going way back to the 1980s and 70s, and, as far back as I can remember, certainly, there have always been scurrilous photographs circulating of people supposedly burning the American flag. And burning the American flag has been a form of protest that is very controversial in the US. Occasionally we get these, people get all fired up about it and start proposing constitutional amendments to ban it as if that would accomplish anything. And people just feel really fired up about the possibility that someone might burn the flag in protest. This seems to be relying on that same emotion, but I never previously would have felt that would be as visceral a reaction that British people would have to seeing the Union Jack burned. Obviously, people wouldn't like it, but I've never seen that used in this way before. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, we don't quite have the same affiliation, same love for the flag here as people do in the States. You mentioned obviously the things there about burning the American flag and how seen that one before. I remember, I think it was at John Oliver, someone did a something on Last Week Tonight about apparently under the rules, the only way to destroy a flag is to burn it. You can't throw them away. You can't put them in the rubbish.
Yeah, it's true. According to the flag code of the U.S. Army, it is inappropriate to put a flag in the trash. You can't throw it in the bin because that's disrespectful. You can't step on it or cut it up and tear it to pieces. That's also disrespectful. So the only appropriate way of disposing with the flag is in a respectful ceremony of burning. Yeah. So there you go, flag facts for you. But it's obviously there are people who do burn the American flag in protest, and their intention is not a respectful ceremony. So I think, to be fair, there's something else going on when that happens. But it's tapping into an idea that Americans have of how closely the symbol of the flag correlates with our feelings about the country. Yes. And I wouldn't previously have said British people have those feelings. No. But maybe that's changing in this kind of Brexit-y era. Maybe people are becoming more emotionally invested in symbols than they had. Certainly in passports, apparently it matters if they're blue. I didn't know that people cared about that. So what do I know? Yeah. The other thing I want to say, just looking at the photograph itself, which I'm guessing, I don't know, we haven't covered the truth or falseness of this yet, but just looking at it, it looks like a bad Photoshop, and almost the logic of it doesn't quite track to me, because it looks to me like the person who is holding the flag that is being burnt is actually wearing a Union Jack flag on their back. So I don't understand what this person in this photo is supposed to believe.
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the things I noticed about it. Yeah. The other thing I noticed was that when you consider where the burning flag is, the person stood behind it seems to be incredibly close to where that big ball of flame would be.
That's surely a health and safety standards issue.
Yes.
Someone should report them to the European Union for health and safety violation.
Absolutely. Now, you can do a quite simple Google image search, which shows you various places that have posted this, but it also shows very similar pictures, including a version of exactly the same photo without the burning flag. It appears that this is not a photo from the recent protests at all. It is actually from a protest from March 2019. It's similar. It is a pro-EU crowd in London on a protest. However, the burning flag has been photoshopped in, from what I can tell online. In fact, when I was doing a search for it, the fact-checking website fullfact.org had even found where the specific image of the burning of flag had come from. It's been taken from an Argentine protest about the Falkland Islands, and from a YouTube video. They seem to have screen captured that and photoshopped that into this particular photo. So yeah, it is quite straightforward on this. Start the show with. It is a fake. It is a Photoshop, as one we had recently with flags photoshopped into a photo. It seems to be quite an easy thing for people to do, but if they don't do it properly, it can be fairly obvious.
Yeah. It's interesting that somebody felt the urge to do this. And I think, as always with fake news, you have to always ask yourself, why did someone want to portray this information? Why did somebody want to get this idea across? And quite often I think it's people just want things to be so true so desperately that they, like, even the people manufacturing it might half believe it's true. It's like sometimes in their mind, I think they're just thinking, I'm sure someone somewhere has burned a flag of the UK. I'll just make it true here so that we can talk about the fact that it must be true. It's
yeah. And around the same time as this came out, there was actually, when I was trying to find if any news outlets had covered it, I did find a story in the Daily Mail which was talking about flag burning during a protest, but they've got a quite clear photo of what appears to be two sort of teenage boys trying to set fire to a very, very small Union flag with a lighter. And there doesn't seem to be many people around. It's not like it's part of a big crowd doing it. It was just two boys doing it. They didn't know who they were, if they were part of the protest or not. It's not very clear. But it's kind of that process where it's like, oh, well, that's not a very good example of it. Maybe we can make a better one. Take that same kind of thing. It's almost like people making these want Remainers to be so anti-British that they want us to be seen burning flags and things like that. So, I think that's probably the reason they do it. And maybe just to get a few extra likes and shares on Facebook and Twitter as well.
Yeah, it's true. I think, politics, especially, very, very recently, where kind of political parties have broken down in the polling. If you see, everything's just all gone up in smoke in terms of who supports what party and so forth. It feels like in the UK, Remain versus Leave is becoming a more durable way of identifying. So it's a question of more sustainable identity rather than a referendum vote. And so I guess with that, you always get this identity formation usually is associated with some kind of othering, right? So it's important to be able to other and distance people who even, you might know many of them, but in this case, Remainers have to be seen to be unpatriotic, because otherwise how can you be seen as patriotic? It feels like a little bit of that process is playing out here. And, I'm sure guilty on both sides, but it's obviously easier to see it when it's people we disagree with doing it against people we agree with.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of on that point, on the interest of both sides, the second story we've got today kind of is from the other side in a way. If you want to read out the headline and the details on that one.
Absolutely. So this is a picture of Dominic Cummings, the current advisor to Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and the quote allegedly from him that is emblazoned over his photo in this image. It says, "Poor people are poor because they have inferior genes and brains. Rich people are rich because they are superior." We don't know the origins of this meme, but we've seen it circulated on both Facebook and Twitter. And versions of it have shown up in various outlets over the years. And I think it's an interesting one because what was your first reaction to it?
My first reaction to it is it sounds like a too on the nose for it to have been true.
Yeah.
That maybe it was a misquote, that maybe he said something along those lines and someone's tried to jazz it up a bit to make him sound even worse.
Yeah, that was my first instinct. I wondered if he was posing a hypothetical or like, people all think that Tories think this. Do you know what I mean? It sounded too much like he was demonizing his own side, like in caricature. Just seemed too easy.
Yeah, it does seem too easy.
The other thing that I thought when I first saw it was Dominic Cummings is a very controversial figure within the Conservative Party. And one of the reasons why is there are lots of allegations that he's not really a Conservative himself, that he has kind of no, that he's politically opportunistic rather than having, true convictions. And obviously he ran the Leave campaign, was seen as quite effective in that. So I also wondered if there were kind of forces at work, even within his own party, who might be inclined to look favorably upon negative content about him.
Yeah, no, I agree. Now, like you say, it's been shared various places on Facebook and Twitter. Now, these are not just sort of anti-Brexit, pro-European groups. Again, it's various people tweeting this as well, including people with blue check marks on Twitter. One of them I found a version of it tweeted by Emma Kennedy. And so when you obviously get people with check marks, whatever field of they're in, you kind of start to trust those comments sometimes.
Yeah.
Now, I looked into it a bit more. I found, like I said in the start there have been variations of the story going around for a number of years. Now, the story seems to date back to 2013 in an essay that he wrote called "Some Thoughts on Education and Political Priorities," which was published whilst he was advisor to then Education Secretary Michael Gove. Now, the words in the viral post are not a quote from that essay. In fact, that phrase does not appear anywhere in the essay or on his blog either. Part of the essay does discuss genetics and social mobility, and that aspect of it was picked up by The Guardian and reported on in an opinion piece by Polly Toynbee. Now, she quotes part of the essay in her article, which says, "Most of those who now dominate discussions of issues such as social mobility entirely ignore genetics, and therefore their arguments are at best misleading and often worthless." So again, it does appear to be based on an article or an essay he wrote, and it has certain parts been paraphrased and exaggerated. So he does kind of mention the genetics are involved, and then the reports at the time went on to say that the experts had kind of debunked that theory.
Mm-hmm. So, though, just make sure I understand that. So he did in fact write an essay about education, which suggested that genetics might be one reason why poorer people are less successful. If you were to summarize or parody that argument, is that the crux of what he was trying to say to some extent?
Yeah.
So what we're seeing is somebody like badly summarizing.
Yeah, he talks about genetics and social mobility and saying that he's saying that there's a link between genetics and social mobility, but everyone else at the time was saying, no, you're wrong. All the experts at the time were saying they're misleading arguments. So there is a grain of truth to what the quote is saying, but it has been blown up out of proportion to make it sound much worse.
And it is false to put it in quotes because he never said or wrote those specific words.
Absolutely. Yes. So
Okay.
we start the day with two false stories on either side of the political divide. We'll go on to story number 3, which is quite an interesting one. It's one of those snappy headlines anyway. 2 women entered a closed amusement park and then sued its operators after injuring themselves while improperly self-operating an attraction. Now, this comes from a Facebook page called Citizens Against Lawsuit Abuse on Facebook, and the post says that 2 women in South Carolina tried to avoid the lines and broke into a water park for a private ride whilst the park was closed. When they got hurt, they decided to take the slide operator to court. Do you think this is a crazy lawsuit? Join CALA today to say #Don'tSueSummer and stand up to lawsuit abuse. And now the news story itself about the actual thing was covered by various US outlets back in 2017 when it actually happened. So this is someone taking a news story and then trying to use it in an advert effectively.
Yeah.
What were your initial thoughts on that one?
So my initial thoughts, again, I came at it with a very American perspective because people may not know, but the American legal system is like the Wild West when it comes to suing for personal injury and liability lawsuits. Whereas here, you can't really. Lawsuits exist, but it's not really quite the same thing. You can't sue for as much money, and lawyers in America are accustomed to approaching kind of civil lawsuits like this, almost like entrepreneurs, right? So like, can I put together a good case? And as a result, there's a longstanding discussion about kind of how far is too far for American lawsuits. So this struck me as another example in a genre that we've seen of people picking an example example of a lawsuit that may or may not have merit, and clearly there's an organization on one side of that strongly opposing the supposedly outrageous lawsuit system. There have been several examples of this type of story I've seen in the past, which have been based on a true fact, which when you go back to the original case, the case has much more merit than the controversy or the kind of the most inflammatory way of describing it is. I mean, the famous case that's always quoted as shorthand for this is the woman who sued McDonald's for spilling hot coffee on herself, which sounds ridiculous, but her actual story is a little bit like quite a bit more sympathetic than that. I mean, McDonald's had been repeatedly warned that their coffee, by their own experts, that their coffee was served at a temperature that was hotter than other fast food chains and was unsafe. The woman an elderly woman in her 80s, who received the coffee, had extraordinarily disruptive kind of 4th degree burns in her inner thighs and groin area from the coffee spill, and she sued them basically because she didn't have medical care, so she needed that. So I mean, it wasn't like she was trolling for lawsuits, and in fact, the court ruled in her favor. So, I mean, whether or not this story is true, I strongly suspect it might be based on something that's true, and I suspect there is more behind it than it seems initially. Yeah. But that's just a wild guess. People also do really stupid things, so that's also a possibility.
Yes. Absolutely. Now, I must admit, every time I hear a story like this, my automatic assumption is if it's a lawsuit in the States, that there's every chance that it's true.
Yeah, there's some crazy stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And we used to do a podcast where instead of looking at fake news, we looked at weird news stories.
Yeah.
And the number of things we came up with on that show about weird lawsuits were crazy. So yeah, I have this instinct to say, no, I think that's probably true. So again, did some searching, found actually that this had been fact-checked previously by someone. Snopes.com had covered this, and they basically say that the gist of the claim is true. 2 women from New York were visiting Myrtle Beach in South Carolina in 2017 and entered the closed Pavilion Park amusement park during the early morning hours and moved an unsecured gate at the entrance to the Pipeline Slide dry slide. They climbed the stairs to the top of the attraction, slid down the dry slide, and then suffered broken bones when they collided with a metal barrier at the bottom of the slide.
Oh, ouch.
In November 2018, they then filed a lawsuit against the park's operators and the ride's manufacturers, asserting that the closed attraction was improperly secured with nothing more than a plastic gate. So that's the details of the lawsuit. Yeah, so they actually suffered broken bones from going down this thing.
Yeah.
Because obviously they took the gate off to get there, but they didn't check to see if there was anything at the bottom. They go straight into it. Now,
Darwin Award entries, no, because they survived. Probably still able to reproduce.
Yeah, they would have qualified, I'm sure, had they died. But yeah.
But another factor that goes into it is, I mean, it sounds like they behaved very stupidly. Yes. I'd be curious to know kind of what their medical situation was, though, because you say they had serious broken bones. One curious factor of the American medical and healthcare system is that there are some instances where if you can sue, if it's hypothetically possible for you to sue the person who's responsible for your injury, that there might be a liability issue, your health insurer will insist that you do so before they will pay for your care. Like right. This may or may not, I have no idea if that's the case in this case, but there was an incident with a woman kind of a couple of years ago, I think, who sued her nephew for giving her too tight a hug. And it was like very bizarre, but it turned out that her health insurer had said that, because the injury was inflicted by another party, if she didn't file a lawsuit, they would not cover her injury, or she would have to pay for it. So like our very broken healthcare system also causes people to do some very strange things, especially when combined with the entrepreneurial nature of American legal system. So basically our system is kind of fucked, and that makes craziness even crazier.
Yeah. No, I work in international health insurance claims. So occasionally I see stuff from the States. And yeah, it can be quite crazy. Now, to put into context these injuries, one sustained a broken right ankle, broken left ankle, and multiple fractures to her left tibia, which required surgeries and therapy to repair. And the other sustained a broken tibia, shattered knee plate, and 2 broken ankles. So quite serious fractures there. And yeah, lots of treatment needed in those instances. Now, the case they put against the park was that they failed to secure the slide, knowing that patrons of Broadway at the beach would be passing through and have open access to the park at all hours of the day. The lawsuit then goes on to say the manufacturer and design of the slide, they failed to install proper safety equipment to secure it when not in use. The lawsuit drew lots of social media comments at the time, condemning it as being stupid. And then the women actually dropped the case days later before it was even served on the defendant.
Right.
They did sue, but then they dropped the case before it went anywhere. So there is truth to the story. Yeah. They did technically do it, but they didn't follow through with it.
So a little bit overblown maybe in the commentary.
A little bit overblown, yes. Now, there's an interesting side note on this from Snopes. The page that shared it, Citizens Against Lawsuit Abuse, is on a fact sheet from the Centre for Justice and Democracy that says that group is, and groups like it, are often fronts for major corporations and industries seeking to escape liability from the harm they cause consumers. Mm-hmm. They say that the CALAs, as they're called, which is Citizens Against Lawsuit Abuse, they represent themselves as grassroots citizen groups, and they say that they're sustained by small donations from ordinary citizens, when actually they represent major corporations and industries seeking to escape liability for the harm they cause consumers. The money trail from these groups leads directly to large corporate donors, including tobacco, insurance, oil and gas, chemical and pharmaceutical companies, medical associations, and auto manufacturers. They're also funded by the American Tort Reform Association, as well as professional associations, local businesses and industries that also wish to be shielded from consumer lawsuits.
The plot thickens.
Yes, so they're using this story to say, don't bring silly lawsuits against people, when it's obviously the people they're representing are the people you would sue in such instances. So that is the reason behind them using the story in the first place.
Very interesting. And kind of matches up with my initial reaction to the story. It was like, oh yeah, there's a lot of people out there who are lobbying hard against these kinds of civil lawsuits, and sometimes for their own dubious reasons. Yeah, and some of these lawsuits which only exist because other parts of our system are broken, like the healthcare system, for example, or the criminal compensation system, for example. So anyway, the criminal justice system is a bit strange as well.
Yes, everything's a bit strange these days.
It's all a bit strange.
So we'll take a look at our next story. If you want to give us the details on that one.
Yeah, so this is something that's been shared on Facebook. The heading is The Suicide Plant. And I guess it's meant to be kind of interesting fact. It says the world's most poisonous plant is Gympie gympie. It is found in Australia. Merely touching it is so painful that it has led many animals as well as humans to kill themselves. The pain is described as a mixture of an acid burn and electric shock. Most anyone who touches it prefers to commit suicide Mostly anyone who touches it prefers to commit suicide than to bear the pain. So what do you think?
It sounds too ridiculous to me. I think again, as a man approaching almost 40, to have not heard of this before, if it's true, does surprise me. You'd think people, as you're growing up, you love to know about the most dangerous things. Most poisonous spider, the most poisonous snake, most of which are all in Australia. So that part of it is kind of believable. If there's any country that's going to kill you by nature, it's Australia. But
death is out there.
It is out there. But that's if Australia exists, of course, based on which conspiracy theories you sign up to. But yeah, the fact that you would rather kill yourself than live with the pain, that is just stretched too far for me. I can't quite wrap my head around that.
Yeah, I buy that. I think there are lots of it sounds too interesting to be true.
Yes, yeah.
And I think animal suicide, I mean, how prone are animals to suicide? I think of, other kind of previous generation of false facts, like lemmings, by the way, do not throw themselves off cliffs. That was completely invented and faked for a Disney documentary. So this idea of animal suicide strikes me as a little too good to be true.
Yeah, absolutely. Now this is coming. The picture's got on the side savagefacts.com as the source. So I searched the plant name and searched all this kind of stuff. Found some news articles in regards to this, and it basically says, from what I can work out, that it's true that the mere touch of one of the hairs on the leaf can result in searing pain. There's a story from September 2018 where scientists called Marina Hurley described the plant's touch as being like being burnt with hot acid and electrocuted at the same time.
Doesn't sound fun.
It doesn't, does it? It gets worse, I think. Intense stinging, burning pain is felt immediately, then intensifies, reaching a peak after about 20 to 30 minutes. The hairs can remain in the skin for up to 6 months, with stings recurring if the skin is pressed hard or washed with hot or cold water.
Hot or cold water, so like tepid water?
Yeah, so water. Yes, so just water, I guess. I don't know why it specifies hot or cold. Apparently not only do you feel the pain from where you're stung, if it's a bad sting, within about 20 minutes your lymph nodes under your arms swell and throb painfully and feel like they've been slammed between two blocks of wood. The intense throbbing pain from both the sting and lymph nodes can last anywhere from 1 to 4 hours, depending on what species you touched and the amount of skin that was stung and how hard you came into contact with the plant. However, most reports of deaths, self-induced or otherwise, caused by the plant appear to be unproven. And there's a story from 2009 in Australian Geographic about her research and around the closely related Gympie Gympie tree. And a former Australian service member wrote in 1994 that after encountering the Gympie Gympie whilst training during World War II, one comrade went as mad as a cut snake from the pain after being stung by it, and another shot himself after mistakenly using it to wipe himself.
Oh my God. Wipe which bits, one wonders.
Yeah, so dread to think. Now, there's also another story here that the first documented effects of the stinging tree were in 1866 that a pack horse was stung, got mad, and died within 2 hours. Similar tales around local folklore of horses jumping off cliffs in agony and forestry workers drinking themselves silly to dull the pain. And then there's a particular quote from the story. So there seems to be, it's one of those things that seems to have gone into folklore in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and that seems to be where these stories originated. There's a study from December 2013 in the Journal of Wilderness and Environmental Medicine that found that up to that point, only one human death had been reported in connection with the plant, and that was back in 1922. So it appears to be a false quote again, but there is elements to it that are true. The pain is apparently ridiculous, but you're not going to want to kill yourself to get over it. Basically, there is some advice that suggests that the plant is not uncommon to find in Australian emergency departments, and it's treated pretty readily, so they know how to deal with it down there. And it does say the government actually posted some tips for anyone who might encounter this plant. It says if you get stung, the most important thing, do not rub the area, as it can break off the hairs and make it difficult to remove.
Oh.
And probably spread them across wherever you are. It says remove any visible hairs with tweezers. Apply and remove adhesive tape or hair removal wax strip to the area to remove the finer hairs. Do not scratch or rub the area. It may cause the hairs to penetrate deeper into the skin.
Right. Can I just say I'm going to shamelessly exploit this new knowledge to bolster my argument to my husband against us holidaying in Australia? Because he would like to go and visit Australia. I have other holiday destinations in mind. I am going to deploy the pain plant for my further arguments.
Add it to the list of spiders and snakes and everything.
Plenty of good reasons not to go to Australia, of which the suicide/pain plant is now my newest.
Yeah, don't tell them about the fact that part of it's fake. Just
No.
Fine.
The pain part is real.
Does not like the sound of that, I must admit.
No, I wouldn't know. To wipe yourself with it seems like a particularly bad idea.
Yes. I think if you're going to go out camping anywhere, know your plants, know what's around, keep an eye out for stuff. I remember we were in Mexico, went to Mexico for our honeymoon, and we were on a guided tour through part of the forest, and our tour guide pointed out a very poisonous tree. The berries on this tree were very poisonous, and I forget what it was called now. But he said the fact that nature is amazing is the fact that there is another tree that has leaves on it which soothe the effects if you rub it on, almost like an antiseptic element within the leaf. And these two trees are always found within about 20 yards of each other. They grow together. So it's like, okay, yeah, here's something nasty. I'm going to plant the thing that helps you right next to it. And apparently you don't ever get one without the other.
Brilliant. There you go. Not complementarity in nature. Well done, nature.
Well done, nature, indeed. So we're doing well tonight. We've got, 4 stories down so far. Kind of elements of truth to all of them, but mostly fake. Hey, just breaking into this episode just to bring you a few words about a charity event I'm working on that I want you to know about. Now, back in 2017, I organised the Southampton Superpod, a live 36-hour podcast to raise money for comic relief. A heap of podcasts from all over the UK came to Southampton, and some shows even called in from Wales, Finland, the US, and even Australia. It was a wonderful event, lots of fun, and we raised a decent chunk of money. Now I'm aiming to do something similar for sport relief, but on a bigger scale, and hopefully raising even more money. Superpod 2020 will be a 2-day podcasting event over the weekend of the 7th and 8th of March. I'm organising some great sporting and comedy podcasts to come along and be a part of the event. Now, these shows will mostly be free entry to the public, but there will be a special ticket-only headline act each evening. Details of the venue, headliners and ticket prices being worked on at present, and we're hoping to make some announcements soon. Until then, we'd love if you could follow us on social media and help us spread the word. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Soton Superpod, that's SOTON Superpod, and we have a Facebook page too. Just search for Superpod 2020. For more information, head to our website, superpod.co.uk, and if you want to be involved in any way, please email me, info@superpod.co.uk. We'll move on to story number 5. And the headline on this one is Scotland has the highest taxes anywhere in Europe. And this came from Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He mentioned this during his first Prime Minister questions. He said that Scotland has the highest tax of anywhere in Europe during a response to criticism from the SNP's Westminster leader, Ian Blackford. So, of course, it's been covered by various news outlets who have been covering that day in Parliament. So what do you think about that one?
Well, it doesn't sound true, I'm going to be honest. So my first instinct was, that doesn't sound right to me. And then I kind of remembered Boris Johnson's career as a journalist, which was not covered in glory from the point of view of accuracy and factual reporting, and how he, famously would just basically make stories up entirely, especially when he was reporting on Europe. He would go to kind of boring old committees and then just report wildly untrue things, and the other journalists who had covered that committee would say, where did you get this from? We don't even, they'd be trying to find references, and like bendy bananas was never a thing, and all these things. He would just make stuff up that made a better story, and his editors were delighted. They were like, fantastic, this is very entertaining, keep on with this excellent European coverage that you're doing, Boris. But it was just pulled out of nowhere. It was made out of nothing. It was very Trumpian. So I, for a number of reasons, but for one of the, it doesn't sound quite right to me, but I also am dubious about the source. Even though he is sadly Prime Minister of this country, I wouldn't take Boris Johnson's factual statements without validation.
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting that we've got people on both sides of the ocean at the minute who quite happy to make stuff up all the time, and then argue against anyone who tries to tell them they're wrong. But yeah, so
at least he didn't use a Sharpie for his this time.
Yeah, just change the figures
draw it
on
in.
some
Yeah,
charts.
just crudely draw it in crayon. Our taxes are £5 million.
Tax.
Yeah.
And then get some random government agency to tweet it.
That'll be next. Just you watch.
Yeah. Now, I tried to work out what kind of tax he meant, because he can't mean corporation tax, national insurance, VAT, capital gains,
because those are set
inheritance,
federally,
or motoring
right?
taxes.
Yeah,
because the Westminster sets all those. What the Scottish government does have is power to adjust income tax and the threshold for income tax separately to Westminster. It's quite easy to look up what those are. So north of the border, the top rate of tax is 46%, which is 1% higher than the rest of the UK. Using calculations by a US think tank, the Tax Foundation, which I found online, that means Scotland ranks 16th out of the 27 European countries in that measure. So definitely not the top.
not the highest.
And as in the rest of the UK, Scots only start paying that top rate of tax on earnings over £150,000 a year. There are 18 EU member states where the top rate threshold is lower. In other words, Scotland ranks 19th in Europe by that metric. Channel 4 have also tried to fact check this. Apparently on their website they say they have asked Downing Street what Mr Johnson was referring to. They've then been pointed by number 10 to the Scotland office, and the Scotland office then referred them back to number 10. So basically they have not got an official response, because they've both been no, speak to them. No, speak to them. So yeah, he may well have made it up. He may well have been misremembering something. We just don't know, because there's just he hasn't said any more on it, and there's nothing to back it up. There's no other statements, no actual figures that have been mentioned. It just appears to be a throwaway comment that's been reported or picked up on, and not all the places that reported it have corrected him. Not all of them have even reported on it either, I must admit. But yeah, he said it on Prime Minister's Questions, so it's been in various places. Anyone who's watching it on BBC Parliament or anything like that would have seen it. It doesn't appear to be true. I can't find any evidence.
The political context behind Scotland is really interesting, isn't it? Because was it just last week that the Conservative, the head of the Scottish Conservative Party, stepped down, and she was just really a very popular politician, and the Conservatives had not that long ago. Conservatives, before she started a bit of a revival for the Scottish Conservatives, they'd been decimated, basically wiped out entirely in Scotland. The next election, which is coming at some point, I guess, Scotland's going to be, it is very likely that they might be wiped out again, because Scotland obviously voted Remain, isn't necessarily looking with favour upon the Johnson administration. So is this his attempt to try and somehow win over a Scottish constituency by suggesting that he'll cut their taxes? But then you get into the devolution question, right? Because the whole point is that they've got devolved government, which Scots are quite happy with. So I think I'm giving him too much credit by assuming he's doing it on purpose.
Yeah, I think it was a classic, like you say, almost Trumpian slip. Almost, he said something, it came into his head. He said it. He didn't necessarily know whether it was true or not. He just said it as he was blurting away. And once he said it, of course, it's out there then.
Yeah.
And he hasn't retracted it. And no one's really clarified what he meant.
Yeah. Neither retracted it nor justified it. Just it's there.
Just it's
like
there.
A big vomit stain in the parliamentary record. Yeah, there it is.
Absolutely. And that's why I want to pick up things like this, because when other people don't say something and don't argue against these things or point them out, they just get left there, and then maybe people with different political views then come back to that later and go, but remember this.
Yeah.
So, well, it's not true. That's kind of what happened with that whole bendy banana stuff. People made jokes about that for years and years and years, and no one really went, well, hang on, that's just not true. Just go, haha, yeah, funny.
Well, that's kind of how I felt after the Brexit vote. It was like, I have had, because obviously I'm an American expat. I'm only recently a citizen of this country. After Brexit, actually, I became a UK citizen. But after I've been following the national newspaper since I moved here in 1999, so a while now, right? And I've been following the national conversation, and the thing that was a revelation to me was I had I had been following the Sun and their up yours, Dolores, and all this kind of bizarre anti-Europe rhetoric, but I thought it was a kind of a joke. I thought everyone knew it was a joke. I thought nobody was taking it seriously in some ways.
Yeah.
And I think I was just a bit naive about the fact that, of course, if you spend a 30-year vituperative campaign of, angry mockery against an institution, that's going to damage that institution in the minds of the public so served. I don't know, in my head, I just thought all of Britain was being hilariously ironic in their loathing of Europe. I didn't quite get that, that not everybody was in on the joke.
Yeah, yeah. And I wonder if there was an element to that originally. And then as time goes on, things change. And maybe then people start realizing, we can use that to our advantage.
Yeah.
So, but hopefully it doesn't get too bad because of it. Touch wood, fingers crossed, and all that.
Well, fingers crossed, hold your breath.
Now, speaking of breath, that's a perfect opportunity to segue on to the last story this week. Do you want to touch on the headline on this one? Yeah,
so this was a statistic that's been quoted widely in various mainstream and online media outlets. The reported fact that the Amazon produces 20% of the world's oxygen. This is obviously in the context of the recent fires that have been devastating the Amazon in Brazil, in South America, and was reported by, it was said by French President Emmanuel Macron, among other people. Did you like my pronunciation of Macron?
Very nice, yes.
I've been practicing that. So Macron and various politicians were mentioned that fact, as well as CNN and Newsweek, in the context of a truly devastating fire, a series of truly, truly devastating fires that have been ravaging the Amazon. And obviously, just trying to, I suppose the context is trying to help people understand the importance of the Amazon to the global ecology. So what do you think?
Well, again, that's something I've heard for a long time as well. So I kind of assumed that was correct. But it turns out the reason I ended up finding this was it used to be when I first started this podcast, I saw a lot of the stories we're talking about come up on my Twitter feed or come up on my Facebook feed. The more I've been doing this podcast, the more I've been looking into fact-checking things. The more actual other fact-checking things have appeared on my feed. So this one actually came through on my Facebook feed this week from factcheck.org. So they've written an article about this, and they spoke to a senior scientist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Colorado, a man called Gordon Bonan. And he says oxygen is a red herring. He says he's been hearing this 20% factoid for at least a decade. And it says it's so pervasive, he's even overheard it being said to school kids on tours at his workplace. He says that people want to talk about the impact of deforestation. Somehow they've latched onto this idea that forests create oxygen, but that's not what deforestation is doing. He says that the Amazon isn't critical because it makes oxygen for humans to breathe. That is largely done by phytoplankton in the sea. Instead, it's because the area's rich biodiversity and its vast stores of carbon and the way the forest influences the local and global climate. There are other scientists, one on Twitter, a guy called Jonathan Foley, who is executive director of the non-profit project Drawdown. He estimates that the Amazon produces around 6% or less of the planet's oxygen. And another guy, Yadvinder Malhi, an ecologist at the University of Oxford, who specialises in the Amazon rainforest, he came up with the figure about 9%. Apparently both numbers are essentially the same, within the same ballpark of uncertainty for the calculation. So the estimates are the figure is quite a bit different than 20%. The reason for that is quite interesting, I think. Apparently the estimates rely on how much photosynthesis tropical forests actually do relative to the total amount done on land and in the sea. They say the exact numbers vary, but according to some studies, tropical forests do between about a quarter and a third of all photosynthesis on land, and the Amazon makes up about half or less of all tropical forests. So alone it does about 12 to 16% of all land photosynthesis. And the ocean then accounts for about half of all photosynthesis done on the planet. So from that, they can work out that, between 6 and 9% of the world's oxygen, perhaps less, comes from the Amazon. And then there's another great one, a guy from the University of Arizona, who says that, 6 to 9% is about right, but it doesn't really matter because, like any other ecosystem, all the oxygen created by the Amazon just gets used by the Amazon. He says that plants suck up about half or more of the oxygen they produce, as they, like humans, respire using oxygen to break down the carbohydrates and grow and survive. And the remaining half or so of the oxygen is consumed by other creatures, mostly microorganisms, that help decompose the fallen leaf litter, dead wood, and other rainforest debris. Basically, the other Malhi guy basically goes back in his blog post to say the net contribution of the Amazonian ecosystem to the world's oxygen level is effectively zero.
Right, exactly. So there you go. So Amazon is valuable, in summary, for lots of reasons, but producing oxygen is not one of them.
Yeah, it basically, like everything on Earth, it creates the oxygen that it uses itself. It sustains itself as does anything else on land. I think it's the seeds that give us most that we then use. An interesting one. I'd never really looked at it that way. I mean, when you grow up and you learn this kind of stuff, it's all trees are good, plants are good. They're the ones that create the air for us, and the Amazon is pointed out as the biggest example of that.
Yeah.
It was only recently when I think we were watching some nature documentary on TV that they talked about how much oxygen the phytoplankton and things like that create, and it's
how interesting,
vastly more.
Yeah. Fabulous. Well, see, there you go. That's a valuable new understanding that I have gained of how biology works. And it's another. It's a brilliant example of how I said earlier in this pod. It's like it's so easy to see misinformation when it comes from people you disagree with, because it's like, well, obviously that's wrong because you're just wrong. Yes. So I'll just find out why you're wrong and I'll dig into that. But we're just not usually motivated to double check the accuracy of information from people. People who are concerned about the climate hear other people concerned about the climate saying, oh, it produces 20% of the world's oxygen. And we all go, oh, my goodness, what a terrible thing. This is another reason why we should care about the climate. Let's go off. Wouldn't it be great if we could build a culture where we genuinely were concerned to make sure that we were all kind of like double checking that everyone on our side was doing and saying the right thing, so that we were giving the most credibility to our arguments. Instead we all get quite prickly sometimes, don't we?
Yes, we do. And that's one thing to remember is that I don't want people to go away from this and think trust no one, believe nothing, but what we just want is for people not to believe everything. And to consider facts from wherever they come from and take them with a pinch of salt and double check them. If they're particularly important or you're going to start quoting them, double check them before you then start sharing stuff. Because it comes back on you at the end of the day.
And ultimately, we're all media these days, aren't we? I mean, we're all sharing information all the time, and I think sometimes people get a bit complacent about, oh, well, if I just share something on my Facebook post, it's not like I'm the New York Times. But cumulatively, everybody doing that adds up to more than any media outlet has available to them. So, and that's how misinformation spreads on all sides, and it doesn't help.
It doesn't indeed. Well, that does wrap up our main news story for this week. Anyone listening, if you've seen something online or heard something that you want to know if it's true, let us know. We'll take a look at it, some of your suggested stories, and discuss them on the next episode. You can contact us on Twitter and Instagram, where we are at MOSwooping. You can email us at moswooping@gmail.com. You can leave us a voicemail on Anchor, where we are MOSwooping, funnily enough. We've also got a Facebook page where you can get updates from us, and we'll tell you about when new episodes are released, as well as a Facebook group where you can join the community and share fake stories that you found as well. You can work out what those called, I'm sure, Ministry of Swooping, for those who can't. Okay, so we now move on to the Ministry of Swooping Fact Quiz. So each week my guest is given a series of 10 facts and has to judge whether they are true or false. We then place them on the Ministry of Swooping leaderboard. Currently there's only one name on that leaderboard, so the score to beat today is Jim Cliff's 7 out of 10 from last week. That's because we changed the format.
It's a pretty respectable score.
So we've got these 10 facts. Are you ready for these, Karen?
Okay, all right, hang on, cracking my knuckles, warming up, stretching, okay. Lay it on me.
Okay, so number 1, Nintendo was formed only 5 years after the end of the Ottoman Empire.
Ottoman Empire. I want to say that might be true because I think the Ottoman Empire continued well into the 20th century. Possible. I'm gonna say true, just for giggles.
It's actually false. The Ottoman Empire spanned from 1299 to 1923. So you're right about
20s.
that. Nintendo was actually founded on the 23rd of September 1889. So it was actually formed within the Ottoman Empire.
Right. Oh,
Okay.
I got it wrong the wrong way.
Number 2, Saudi Arabia import camels from Australia.
Oh, see, now I'm going to second guess myself because that sounds so false that it probably is true. I'm going to, you know what? I'm just going to, it doesn't sound true, but Saudi Arabia has so much money, they probably do all sorts of crazy things. So let's say it's true.
It is true. They import them for meat consumption. They don't breed enough within their own country to satisfy demand. So they import them from Australia.
Okay.
Number 3. Cleopatra lived closer to the invention of the iPhone than she did to the building of the Great Pyramid.
Now see, I think that's true because people forget that the Egyptian Empire lasted for thousands of years. It was ridiculously long. I remember when we were covering in Western civilization that it was one of the most durable and sustainable kind of civic institutions, if you will, or governmental institutions of all time. And she was towards the end of it because she was in the Roman era. I'm going to say true.
It is true. Yes, well done. Yeah, Cleopatra lived in between 51 and 30 BC. The Great Pyramid Giza was built between the years 2580 and 2560 BC. The iPhone released in 2007. So yeah, by some 500 odd years closer to the iPhone than the Great Pyramid.
And hey, by the way, well done, pyramid makers. How'd you do that? That's a long time ago to do something that big. Goodness me.
Okay, fact number 4 for you. Cookie Monster's real name is Jared.
The character Cookie Monster.
Yep.
Oh gosh, I want that to be false because I'd like to think that if Cookie Monster's name were Jared, I would know that. I'm going to say false.
It is false. His real name is actually Sid. Which I think is even better.
Even better. How do we know that?
Apparently it's referenced in a song.
Okay.
There's a song that calls him Sid at some point.
All right. C is for cookie. It's good enough for me.
And do you know what Cookie Monster's British cousin is called?
Oh, I do not.
Biscuit Monster.
Of course it is, now that I think about it.
We had Children's TV on a couple of weeks ago, and Fairchester Hotel was on.
Fairchester Hotel, my daughter loves it.
Yeah, so the Cookie Monster is obviously a character in that, and he got visited by his British cousin who wears a bowler hat, and it's called Biscuit Monster.
Biscuit Monster, excellent.
So there we go. Another fact. That's not one of the facts for you, though.
Just a free bonus fact.
Just a free bonus there for you. So fact number 5 for you is shoe shops used X-ray machines to measure shoe sizes in the 40s.
In the 40s. Okay, so I'm just thinking this through. So in the 1940s, after the there was a lot of enthusiasm around radiation and kind of all the amazing things you can do with radiation, like X-rays. And I remember people got wildly overexcited, which caused, and there was in the sort of atomic era after the nuclear bomb was invented, there was a lot of kind of irrational exuberance around what X-rays and various different radioactive things could do. So would they have used that to measure shoe sizes? Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Oh, I don't know. I'm gonna say false.
Well, according to what I read online, it was true. It doesn't specify how common it was or whereabouts these shops were, but it does say it did happen, and it was before the risks obviously were fully understood. But yeah, it did happen.
Yeah, I knew that people got wrong the potential risks of radiation and did all sorts of silly things.
Yeah, absolutely. Fact number 6, from the time it was discovered to the time it was denounced as a planet, Pluto did not complete one rotation around the Sun.
Oh, I'm pretty sure that is true because I think it takes Pluto. It's way, way out in the edge of the solar system. And I think it takes like 100 years or more for Pluto to... Well, hang on. When was it discovered? So... I don't think it completed, so I think it's true that it did not complete a rotation.
Yeah, you're right. It was discovered in 1930, although the earliest evidence of it was back to 1909, but it was kind of, in the background of photos. It wasn't noticed at the time. So 1930 is when it was officially discovered. It was downgraded to a dwarf planet in August 2006, and Pluto's orbital period is currently about 248 years. And I say currently because it's not a perfect circle, it's elliptical, and it changes each time it goes round. But on its current orbit, it's 248 years. So yes, way more than the time it was a planet.
Good stuff.
Number 7 for you then. Oxford University is older than the Aztec Empire.
The Aztec Empire was still in place when Columbus and his people showed up and, brought smallpox and committed genocide across the continent, but that's not the context here. So it was still around then, I believe. So it could well be that Oxford University was older. Yes, I think Oxford University is older than the Aztec Empire.
Yeah, correct. It is true. The earliest evidence of teaching at Oxford was in 1096. And the Aztec period was between 1300 and 1521.
Whew.
Well reasoned. You worked that one out well there. Number 8 for you then. Bullets are the only thing that can pierce an armadillo's armour.
Huh. That can't be true. That's got to be false because lots of things can pierce. I mean... Bullets are the only thing. I mean, in a world full of a lot of penetrative things, that seems extraordinary. No, I'm going to say that's false.
It is false.
Yeah.
Actually, they are bulletproof, the armour. In fact, one Texas man was hospitalised when a bullet he shot at an armadillo ricocheted off the animal and hit him in the jaw.
Well, it brings... Don't mess with Texas.
Absolutely. Number 9. Octopuses lay 56,000 eggs at a time.
Okay, I know nothing of octopus reproductive systems. Do they even lay eggs? I feel like they might give birth to tiny octopi, but is that the plural of octopus? Octopuses? Octopi?
I think it was octopi.
Yeah, okay.
That sounds right.
Yeah. I'm going to say it's false just because I know nothing of octopus reproduction, but no. Let's say no.
It's actually true. In fact, some lay up to 200,000 at a time.
Gosh.
So, last one for you then. Kleenex tissues were designed to replace handkerchiefs.
Were Kleenex tissues designed to replace handkerchiefs? I suspect they probably weren't. I suspect they were probably invented for something else and then used for this purpose. So let's say no. False.
You are absolutely spot on. Yes, they were invented when there was a cotton shortage during World War I. Kimberly-Clark developed a thin, flat cotton substitute that the army tried to use as a filter in gas masks. The war ended before the scientists perfected the material, so the company redeveloped it to be smoother and softer and marketed Kleenex as a facial tissue instead.
Excellent.
So there you go. At the end of that, you have scored 7.
So I've matched the other person on the leaderboard.
You have matched Jim, so you are now joint top of the leaderboard.
But also joint bottom.
But also joint bottom, yes.
Oh, well.
Until next time. Well, mind you, you still might be. I said to Jim last week you'll be top for at least a week, but he's now joint top. So, yeah, you're both on top. So thank you very much for that. Well done. So the show coming to a close now. So before we go, I just want a bit of begging from me. If you listen this far and you like it, then thank you very much. We're very honoured. Please do hit that subscribe button. Make sure you don't miss any future episodes. And if you've got a minute, please do give us a rating and a review on whichever podcast system you're listening to us on. Those ratings do actually help us be heard by more people, so you'll be doing us a favour. And also don't forget to follow us on all the social medias and send us any news stories you want looking into. All the contact details are coming up again at the end of the show. Now, before we go, do you have anything else you want to say, Karen, or do you want to let people know where they can find your podcast?
Yeah, so again, it's primarily 2020. You can find me. I'm also an Anchor podcast, but you can also find me on your podcast player of choice. Primarily 2020. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm at KarinJR. That's KarinJR on Twitter. And the only other thing I'd say is if by any chance you are an American listening to the sound of my voice, please, 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 for all that is good and holy, register to vote or request your absentee ballot to vote in the election. There's an election every year, even if it's not a federal election. And you can do that by going to vote.org if you're an American back home, or if you, like me, are an American expat living abroad anywhere in the world, the website for you is votefromabroad.org, and they'll sort out your absentee ballot for you.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. Now, we always end our show with our good friend Rando Cardrissian, who picks our episode subtitle. Now, this comes from one of the special rules in Cards Against Humanity, which is what ended where we got our show name from, I should say. So I've already drawn 2 random cards out from the standard UK version of the game, and this is what we've come up with our subtitle today. It is, What Don't You Want to Find in Your Kung Pao Chicken? Emma Watson. So that is our random subtitle for this week. So on that unsavoury note, we'll say thanks everyone for listening, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
If you want to contact the Ministry of Swooping, you can email moswooping@gmail.com. You can send a voicemail at anchor.fm/moswooping. You can also join our Facebook group and be a part of the community. Just search for Ministry of Swooping. Don't forget, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram, where we are at moswooping.